So how can we be great the Jesus way? Well, before we really look at being great, we have to recognize that humanity has a problem. And now we've got a lot of problems, but one that I want to talk about specifically today is a problem that really began at the very beginning of existence on this earth. You see, we like to have things our way. Selfishness. We want things the way we want them, and we want them for us. And it, as I said, it has been a problem since the very beginning of the history of mankind. We have always had this problem. Adam and Eve. Does it get much more of a beginning of humanity than Adam and Eve? No, it doesn't. Adam and Eve, they were the first ones. When they ate that forbidden fruit, you think about it and you look at why they ate the forbidden fruit. They ate it because they wanted to be like God. And they decided, because, Satan talked to them and says, the serpent said to them, hey, God's holding out on you. I know it's a paraphrase, but really if you look at it, the serpent says, God's holding out on you. He's holding back the best. And if you want to be like him, you got to eat this fruit. And they looked at it, and Eve looked at it and said, it looks good. Looks like it'll be tasty. And I can be like God. I can know everything. And God is holding out the best. And so Eve reached out, plucked that fruit from the tree, and took a bite, and gave it to Adam. And men, lest you think that we can get off the hook here, remember there's a few little words in that passage that tells about Adam and Eve. And it says, Eve handed it to her husband who was with her. Now, guys, we can't blame it all on Eve. Because it sounds like Adam was standing right there and she said, hey, hubby, have a bite. And he did. But they wanted the best for themselves. They were selfish. Companies make their slogans. Have it your way. We're there for you. Everything in our company revolves around serving you and giving to you, because companies recognize, advertisers recognize that we want everything done for us, and we want it to be all about us. The church is often no different. As churches, we develop programs and marketing campaigns to attract new people with the idea that you can come, walk into our building, never do anything, just sit there and just soak it all in and never have to lift a finger in serving. And we try to give this idea that you can come in and you can learn and you can be a great follower of Christ and never do anything. We want to make you sometimes to be consumers. Well, Jesus, in the passage we read, had just finished talking with James and John, who said to him, hey, we want to be number one and number two right behind you in the new kingdom, Jesus. And so Jesus, he had the selfishness of his closest disciples were right there. And you think about how close are those disciples? Well, remember, within the 12, you kind of have groupings. And James and John were always in the first grouping. They were in that closest group. They were the inner core of Jesus' disciples. And if these two guys struggle with selfishness, the cream of the crop, so to speak, I would just guess that all the rest of them struggled with selfishness too. And in trying to combat the selfish nature that was coming out of his disciples, Jesus challenged them with a seemingly bizarre statement. He said, in order to become the greatest, and I am sure they all perked up when Jesus said, to become the greatest, they probably all sat up straight and said, all right, I got to listen to this. This is important. That's like a teacher saying, this is going to be on the test. Well, you hear, in order to become the greatest, you're going to sit up. Oh, yeah, okay, what is it? You have to become the least. And I am sure when he said that, they looked at him and thought, okay, Jesus, you done got crazy on us. What do you mean? To become the greatest, I got to be the least? I don't understand. The math does not add up. Someone probably said, I'm not like Matthew over here. I'm not a tax collector. I wasn't dealing with numbers all the time. But even I know that math just does not compute. What do you mean? In order to become the greatest, you have to become the least. In that statement, Jesus is giving the solution that Christianity has to one of those great problems of humanity, the problem of selfishness. You see, Jesus says that putting others first and serving with no focus on self-gain in the here and now is the way to become great, the Jesus way. And in this passage, Jesus points out that the Gentiles, and when a Jewish person uses the word Gentile, they're not talking about a specific nation. Really what they're saying is, take the Jewish people and put them in a circle, and the Gentiles are everybody outside the circle. So you're either a Jew or you're a Gentile. And so when Jesus says the Gentiles, he's saying everybody else. Really, he could probably say us too, because much of Israel's history, they follow this exact same pattern. But he says the Gentiles, everybody outside of Israel. Their kings and their rulers who gained in honor, wealth, and prestige, they did so by forcing those under them to give up their honor, their wealth, their prestige. They got those things. They became great in the eyes of the world by pushing other people down. It wasn't necessarily that they stood on the shoulders of others as much as they climbed over their backs and shoved them down so that they could be the greatest. And kings ruled through force and authority, not through self-sacrifice, knowing that as long as they had the military force that would be necessary, they could get their way. As long as they had enough military force and enough military might that they could rule anybody. Jesus' hearers, when Jesus said this, they would look around and go, well, yes, we understand that. Why? Because Israel itself was occupied by Rome and its massive army. The people of Israel knew that you had to serve Rome, because if you did not serve Rome, Rome would bring even more of its military in, and it would conquer and beat down your nation until you said, yes, Rome, we will serve you. The people of Israel, somewhere around 30 years after Jesus' death, the people of Israel decided to rise up and to rebel against Rome, because they said, we are tired of being under Rome's thumb. And when they rose up and they rebelled against Rome, we had this occupation that came in, and the Roman general led his army through and just devastated, utterly destroyed the countryside, and even destroyed the city of Jerusalem. And they held their power because they had the force. In countries all across our world today, dictators hold power by the sheer force of arms and terror. Many leaders, even in our country, hold their position by threats. Now, we just call it politics in the U.S., but it's the same. If I can have something I can hold over you, I can hold you down, and then I can be great. But Jesus turns it all around. He says, those that are considered great in this world, they lord it over, or they dominate those that are their underlings. And some jobs they would deem to be too unimportant or below me to do. And so I won't do them. Well, Jesus turned it all on its head. He said, in order to be great, or in order to be the most important, you had to be willing to serve and to serve all. Our world suffers because its people refuse to achieve greatness through the methods that Jesus laid out. Our world suffers because as humanity, we refuse to become great by becoming a servant. I recently read a book by Nelson Searcy, who's a pastor in New York City. And he told about a guy that was a servant in the church that he pastors there in New York City. So this was a man who traveled the world throughout his work week and stayed in 5-star hotels. He met with world leaders and CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. You know, this was a man who lived in these high circles of society, flew first class everywhere he went. But yet every Thursday night, here's a man that would show up at the church and would spend an hour to an hour and a half taking pieces of paper and folding them and shoving them into the bulletins and passing it on to the next person. And he says in the book that one of his pastors on staff who was kind of new saw this guy, and he knew the job that he had, and you know, he was just impressed. He was like, man, I just can't believe that this guy comes in. And so he talked with him. And this very wealthy, very powerful man says back to this pastor when he says, you know, why do you come? And he says, are you kidding? This is the highlight of my week. And the pastor looked at him like, what? And he says, this, because what I do here matters. And the pastor was thinking, you meet with like big shots. You meet with important people. You have people under you that make 6 figures. How can stuffing a bulletin be important? And he says, it's because I have an opportunity to serve somebody else. God has called you and I to service. He has called us to be his servants and to be the servants of those around us. If you want to be great, you must become the servant of all. And yes, it turns the advice of the world on its head. It flips it upside down, but it's still true. Do you feel too important, too smart to take on service in God's kingdom? Are you too important to stoop and wash someone's feet? Let me ask that again. Are you too important to stoop down and wash someone's feet? And before you answer that question, think about what Jesus did. Just before he was betrayed, just before he was crucified, what did Jesus do? He stooped down. Jesus, the Creator. You know, John 1:1 says the Word was with God. In the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God. The Word was God. And everything that came into existence came through the Word. And who was that Word? It was Jesus. That the very one who created everything, the one who in heaven, the Philippians 2 tells us that at some point in the future, that every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that Jesus is King and Lord. This Jesus, the one whom angels bowed before, that Jesus got down on his knees and took water and a towel and did a job that even the lowest slaves felt was beneath them. And he washed the feet of his disciples. And so are you too important to wash someone's feet? When we recognize God's way and we become a servant, we open the door to true greatness. Most people think that the path to real power is getting elected to the right office or getting hired as an executive in a major company or having other people work under you. But you know, the path to real power, to real greatness, might just be taking out the trash on Sunday mornings. Preparing for this sermon, I sat down with, I believe, with 6 other people. And I just asked them, what do you do on Sundays? Or something preparing for Sundays? And we came up with a list. And these are jobs that they either did on a regular basis or had just recently done regularly. And so here we go. Jobs done on Sunday. Now these first ones occur before you arrive. Some of you, these things occur while you are not even eating breakfast yet. Maybe even haven't taken a shower yet. So here are some things we do. Somebody does the coffee setup. Another makes sure that coffee supplies are available. We have somebody that makes the coffee. Okay, now, those of you sitting under the overhang, under the balcony this morning, do you recognize that something isn't out there? Normally, we put ropes on those back pews. Why? We want to encourage people to sit up a little closer. The whole entire service is better when you sit up closer. Well, the people that do that today were not here. And actually, the people that back up do that are not here today. And so they didn't get put out. Not a big deal, right? But just imagine if you came in next Sunday and the person that makes the coffee and the backup person on making the coffee did not show up. Wouldn't you be a little upset if you walked in next Sunday and there was no coffee out there? Okay, now that, for some of you, would be a crisis on the, the level of World War III. I mean, it would be just horrid. I don't drink coffee, so, if the only thing that would bother me would be the snacks weren't there. But those things are done. Okay, you may look at that and go, okay, there you go. Well, guess what? Oh, there's more. Putting out, now this one's out, putting out worship or water bottles for the worship team and for myself. Straightening up sanctuary, ETC director, greeters every entrance. Okay, why that first one? Why is it even on there? Because you know what? On Sundays, about the only thing that I really remember is what I'm going to preach that day. Everything else, I am completely scatterbrained. And I would never think to grab myself a bulletin and have myself a water bottle down here so when my voice starts to crack, I can get a drink of water. You may go, Grant, you should learn how to do that. I probably should, but I have tried for years and I just can't, okay? Sundays, I have laser focus. And having somebody do that, it takes a lot of stress off of me. I don't even have to think about those things. Some more jobs. Sound good? Oh, wait, there's more. Putting a bulletin on the pew for myself and for Brad, again, allows us not to even have to think about it. Pick up litter on the church grounds. Unlock doors by the worship center. Turn the lights on. Put the ropes on the pews. Sending out a Thursday email. That is an email that goes out to our Sunday school teachers, just telling them what's happening this Sunday, who's doing the videoing, who's doing ETC, so that we can talk to those in our class and encourage them and remind them that they have that job on Sunday. Folding the bulletins or putting out new magazines and open windows. Folding the bulletins, putting the inserts in the bulletins, putting attendance sheets in the rooms. You might think, okay, he's done, right? No. Here are some ministries, some services that are done either during or after the time that worship is finished. We have somebody that cleans up the coffee. Another person takes a projector down to the office from the children's Sunday school class. They use a projector as part of their class every week. Somebody takes that projector down to the office, secures it so it doesn't grow feet and walk off. Vacuum the preschool room. Straighten up the preschool room, cleaning the toys, doing those things so that because we share a lot of our preschool rooms, we need those things done after Sunday morning to be prepared for the next group that comes in and then to be prepared for when we come back the next Sunday. Empty the garbage by the coffee service area. Empty the garbage in the preschool area. Are you thinking, okay, surely he's done now, right? Again, this wasn't like a mass email that I sent to everybody and said, what do you do on Sundays? These are just 6 people. Sunday school teacher and the preschool, the children and the youth area. Policing the coffee service area. That's just making sure, that it gets kind of cleaned up throughout the time and that people aren't getting too much, that we don't have kids getting too much, all of those little things. Security, just checking and making sure that we don't have someone coming in and creating problems, just kind of watching, keeping eyes out. Again, greeters at every entrance. Enough for you? Oh, wait, there's more. Typing the announcements. and printing those out, putting them on the pew. Again, they put them on the pew so that I can look and say, okay, announcements today. Because if not, I would forget. And you'll probably see, I'll probably forget some today because the person that does that isn't here. And I didn't get my announcement email or my announcements printed out and placed on the pew. And so I'm going to have to wing it when we do announcements in a minute. Locking the doors, turning the lights off, sending out an email to all of you with the announcements for that week so that because you probably didn't listen to me when I gave them, you'll be able to read them by email. 6 people do all of those things. And that's not even everything. There are probably other jobs that those that were in that room do that they didn't even talk about. And sometimes when we start to sit down and we start to think about how can we put people into service, I think sometimes we begin to say, oh man, there's not enough. There's not enough to do. The reality is, there is an opportunity for every single one of us to have an area of service. And you may go, but Grant, some of those are very simple. Right. I'll be honest with you. A lot of the things that we just went through, the reality is, you don't have to be a biblical scholar. The reality is, you probably don't even need to know where Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are found in the Bible to be able to do a lot of those jobs. A lot of those jobs are ones that if you can walk, you can do them. But why? Why lower myself to why lower myself to take a bulletin and a couple of water bottles and put them on this front pew so Brad and Grant can have a bulletin and a water bottle? Why should I lower myself? Is it so that I can serve the great and mighty Brad and Grant? No. No. Here's why. Jesus says, you want to become great, be a servant. Do for others. And the reality is, because I don't have to think about whether a water bottle and a bulletin is going to be at my pew when I sit down Sunday morning, that is just one thing that's completely off my mind, and it allows me to focus in on other things. And if you take from another person, another area of ministry, and you start to do something, you have the opportunity to make an impact, not just on the life of the person that you took a job from, that you relieved them of, but you have an opportunity to make an impact on anybody else that comes in, on everybody else that sits in here. If you say, boy, Grant, I can straighten up the sanctuary after we finish worship. I can go through and make sure that all the bulletins that were left are picked up, and any trash that's left in here, I can get that out, and I can make sure that all of the other stuff is done. I can do that. Well, that means that this afternoon, when the Spanish church comes in here and they gather and they worship today, that there's not going to be that distraction for that group. And that means that this next week, Ray's not going to have to spend time doing those things, and therefore he's going to be able to spend more time on some other part of the building, making our building look even better, more attractive for somebody to come in and want to worship God here. Every single thing that we do opens an opportunity for somebody else to encounter God better. But there's another thing. Look on your connection card. On the back, I commit to. I recognize selfishness in my life and repent of it. If that is you, if there have been times in your life where you recognize, you know what, I'm just selfish. You said earlier, Grant, that I want it my way. Man, I realize that's me. I want it my way. I want you to do for me. If you recognize that, and you recognize that, that was part of that first sin of Adam and Eve, they wanted it for them. And if you recognize that that is what Jesus taught against so many times, and you say, I want to be a follower of Jesus. I want to live as Jesus would want me to live. And so I recognize that I have selfishness in my life and I want to repent of it. Mark that right there. And a way to combat selfishness is to do for others. So the second I have is I commit to greatness the Jesus way. And if you mark those two, then you ought to mark that last one. I want to serve wherever God can use me at Calvary. And now the place that God may use you at Calvary might be that we ask you on Sunday morning when we finish worship and everybody is leaving and we're going off to dinner or to watch the Seahawks or whatever it is that we're doing. The way for you to combat selfishness might be to walk down to the preschool area, to grab a trash can filled with smelly diapers, tie it up, and carry it out to the dumpster. That might be your path that God can use to help you combat selfishness and become great the Jesus way. So I want to encourage you to mark, I want to serve wherever God can use me at Calvary. If you mark that, somebody will be contacting you. And one of the jobs on this list we'll be asking you about. Now, if you already see one of those jobs and say, you know what, I can do that. You might just write it below there and say, I want to do that. I want to serve. It may not seem like it's important. But let's just have nobody pick up the trash and those smelly diapers in the preschool room for a week or two. Anybody want to volunteer to teach in that room when it hasn't been done for a week or two? I don't see any hands going up. I'll tell you, I don't. You know, how hard would it be for us to worship if Alan Brown wasn't seated right up there, pressing buttons as I'm talking to make the PowerPoints go and to keep up, and as we sing to keep it forward? How hard would it be if Tim Thornton wasn't sitting at the sound desk sound booth right now, making sure that my volume doesn't go too high or too low? If somebody didn't come in and vacuum. There are just so many things that it's an opportunity for you to combat selfishness in your life and to serve. And God is calling every one of us to greatness, the Jesus way. Father, help us